All the way from the start, I can feel it in my heart, like all the way from the start.
Hey, what's going on out there? I'm Sean Devine. Hope you all are doing very well today. We've got a new tutorial where we're going to talk about mixing and mastering in the same session. So a lot of you have questions about this and you ask, is it possible? Should you do it? What are some scenarios where you should consider mastering in your mixing session? And when are some times when it's just not really a good idea? So we're going to go through a couple of different scenarios. I'm going to talk about a few concepts with this subject so that you can make the best decision on when and when not to do this. So right now I have a session open where I am in fact doing some mastering processing on the stereo bus, and this is the mixing session. So let me just play this back, and what I want to focus on here, I'm going to pull this down, and we're going to look at our CPU. Now, given that I do have the screen capture going for the video, that does introduce a little bit more resources needed, but let's just keep an eye on this.
High spirits, more ambition. Now I got my care in the hands of the great physician. Glory be to God who pulled me from the wreckage. And as I came to, man, I came with the message. On the side of the highway, giving praise. On Thanksgiving Day, man, I left for my life. This is my testimony.
All right, so this brings me to the first point of when you should consider mastering in your mixing session. You need to keep an eye on your resources. So that this includes your CPU, your RAM or your memory, as well as your hard drive. So over here, we are focused on the audio processing that's going on. And then we've got our disk IO over here. So if you are seeing a lot of buffer underruns and errors, then one thing that you're going to want to check is just to see what your buffer, your IO is here. Mine is set to 512. And generally when I'm doing mixing and mastering, I set this as high as possible because we don't need to worry so much about recording delay and those types of things. So first set that, but after you've done that, if you're still experiencing these buffer underruns and things and your machine is just starting to choke up, then mastering in your mixing session is not going to be a good option because you're going to get really frustrated once you start putting a lot of plugins on the stereo bus. Something to consider is, of course, that mastering requires a lot of resources. And so these plugins, Ozone, some of these other ones that we're going to be applying, they're going to need their own resources. So if your machine is fast enough to do both the entire mixing session, I've got a pretty big session here with a lot of plugins. If you can do it, then that, of course, is something to consider, but you don't want to be banging your head on the desk because your computer can't handle both. So there's times where I have sessions that are entirely too involved in terms of the mixing process for me to do the mastering in it. So I just bounce that out. It's no problem to do it in a separate session if my resources available are not appropriate. So just something to consider. Another thing that you should consider, and this is a really good reason to do some of your mastering in the mixing process, if possible, is to have some flexibility by having access to your mix within the mastering session. So meaning, if I go over here and one of my tracks, maybe the clap is too loud while I'm mastering, or the snare is too loud, I can just go into the mix and I can just bring that down or up, So it gives you that flexibility. But on the other side of that, you want to be able to commit to your mix because you don't want to necessarily be in here trying to do the master and then you're, doing a lot of edits to the mix where you should probably just finish the mix, commit to it, and then do what you can in the master. Otherwise, you're just going to have a big process of never finishing the mix. I'm going to put a link to a video about how to know when you're done with the mix up here in the corner. But again, this is just making sure to commit to the sound of the mix, commit to when it's done, and then make sure that when you switch over to doing the mastering processing, you're focused on that. But again, if you need the flexibility to just turn something down or up, a lot of times maybe you introduce some compression or something in the imaging of your mastering, and then you notice that one of your elements has become too loud, or maybe it's not loud enough. If you've got that track right there in this same session, it's a matter of just, moving that fader up or down, and it's fixed rather than having to do a ton of work in the master to try to figure out what frequency to pull up at a very narrow curve just to get that track. One other thing to be really careful about with mixing and mastering in the same session is a lot of times if you start to do mastering before you should really in the process, like if you're doing it really early on, then you can start to rely on the mastering to give you your sound, which is a dangerous place to be because you want your mix to do the quote heavy lifting and heavy work. So we talk about this a lot, really achieving the balance and getting the presence and the impact from the actual mix, not from the master. The master is supposed to be that last, 5% icing on the cake. So you can get into a dangerous sort of downhill slope if you start to master too early. And then again, you're relying on something like Ozone or whatever to give you, the bulk of your sound. And if you start to become too reliant on the mastering process in that early stage, then your mixes are really going to suffer. And let's say, for instance, you're mixing for a client or you're mixing for someone that this is going to go out to after the fact for mastering, you're in for a whole lot of surprises. Once you pull off all your master processing, send this off to another engineer or the artist, and when it comes back, it's not going to sound anything like what you had because, again, you relied too much on the mastering process, and they're going to have their own way of kind of approaching that. So I always like to, again, get the sound really close in the mix. That way, there's not a lot of guesswork in terms of the mastering. The mastering is just providing that extra little bit of sizzle and magic. All right, y'all, so that's a couple of things to consider for mixing and mastering in the same session. When it's a good idea, when it's not such a good idea. There are some advantages to it, as we pointed out, especially having flexibility with making subtle mixing changes, once you start doing mastering. Also, you've got to keep an eye on your CPU resources because, if your computer can't handle it, you're just going to end up frustrating yourself, and you could potentially end up messing some stuff up in terms of your automation and things, sessions crashing. That sort of stuff you don't want to get into because you're trying to push things too much. We stress the mixing process a lot on this channel and having it to establish the sound and the overall presence and impact and the dynamics of your session. So don't rely too much on the mastering within the same session. Don't let it become a crutch for you. That's the key. You want it to be, again, something that just reinforces the work you've done in the mix. And you also want to be able to commit to your mix and not be going back and having to make a ton of changes once you get into the mastering process. And so that's why it's actually better in that case to do the master after the fact. So balance your mix out, get it into another session. That way you fully committed, because you're never really committed to it until you said, okay, I'm not going to make any changes in terms of the mix itself. So I hope this is helpful, y'all. If you have any questions or comments about mixing and mastering in your own sessions, maybe you have some suggestions for what's worked for you and what's not worked for you, feel free to leave that below. If you learned anything in the video, please like, subscribe, and consider sharing. Appreciate y'all. I'll talk to you soon.